The whispers started the moment Tessa Ramsey stepped off the stagecoach in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, her threadbare dress hanging from her frame like a shroud on a skeleton. It was June of 1872, and the Dakota Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street as curious onlookers gathered to see the mail-order bride who had traveled all the way from Pennsylvania to marry Harold Jennings, the owner of the general store. A woman near the saloon clutched her shawl and muttered just loud enough for Tessa to hear, "Poor thing looks like a bag of bones. What man would want that for a wife?" Tessa's cheeks burned with shame, but she kept her eyes forward, searching the small crowd for the man whose letters had promised her a fresh start, a new life far from the factory town that had nearly killed her. 3 years of working 16-hour days in a textile mill, breathing lint and chemicals, eating scraps when she could afford them, had whittled her down to almost nothing. Her auburn hair, once thick and lustrous, now hung limp and dull against her pale neck. Her green eyes, sunken in her gaunt face, still held a flicker of hope despite everything. Harold Jennings pushed through the crowd, and Tessa's heart sank. The man before her bore little resemblance to the description in his letters. Where he had claimed to be prosperous and kind-looking, she saw a weasel-faced man with calculating eyes that traveled over her emaciated body with obvious disgust. He was perhaps 40 years old, though his thin lips and pinched expression made him appear older. "You are Tessa Ramsey?" he asked, his voice sharp with disappointment. "Yes, sir. I'm pleased to finally meet you, Mr. Jennings." Tessa tried to smile, but her chapped lips cracked painfully. Harold's nose wrinkled as if he had smelled something foul. "You are not what I expected. Your letter claimed you were healthy and capable of bearing children and working hard in a household." "I am capable, sir. I have worked every day since I was 12 years old. The journey was long and difficult, but I assure you I'm strong enough to be a good wife." Several townspeople had gathered closer now, unabashedly listening to the exchange. An older woman with silver hair and a kind face frowned at Harold's rudeness, but most seemed entertained by the spectacle. "Strong!" Harold laughed bitterly. "You look as though a stiff wind would blow you clear to Minnesota. This will not do. This will not do at all." Tessa felt tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Please, Mr. Jennings, I have nowhere else to go. I sold everything I had to pay for passage here. Give me a chance to prove myself. I can cook and clean and mend. I will work hard, I promise you." "With what strength? You are nothing but skin and bones. I need a wife who can help run my store, manage my household, and give me sons. You look half dead already." He turned to address the crowd. "Let this be a lesson about trusting letters and photographs. Obviously, this woman's picture was taken years ago when she still had meat on her bones." The humiliation was complete. Tessa stood frozen in the middle of the street, her small carpet bag at her feet, as Harold Jennings walked away without a backward glance. The crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads in pity, others whispering behind their hands. She had exactly 17 cents to her name, no return ticket, and nowhere to sleep that night. "Miss, you cannot stand here in the sun all day." The silver-haired woman approached cautiously. "I am Mrs. Adelaide Hoffman. I run the boarding house on 3rd Street. You look as though you might faint at any moment." "I do not have money for a room," Tessa admitted quietly, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We can discuss that later. First, you need water and shade. Come with me now." Mrs. Hoffman's tone brooked no argument, and Tessa was too exhausted and defeated to protest. The boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with white paint and green shutters. Mrs. Hoffman led Tessa inside to a small parlor and pressed a glass of cool water into her trembling hands. "Drink slowly, dear. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. There was bread and cheese at the way station in Yankton." Mrs. Hoffman made a disapproving sound and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a plate containing fresh bread, butter, sliced ham, and an apple. "Eat, not too quickly, or you will make yourself sick." The food was the finest thing Tessa had tasted in years. She forced herself to take small bites, even though her stomach cramped with hunger. "You are very kind, Mrs. Hoffman. I do not know how I will repay you." "You are not the first woman to arrive here and find herself in difficult circumstances. Harold Jennings is a difficult man. Honestly, I think you are better off without him, though I know that does not solve your immediate problems. Isn't it? Hoffman sat across from Tessa, studying her with shrewd but sympathetic eyes. Tell me, child, what skills do you have? I worked in a textile mill for 3 years. Before that, I helped my mother with laundry and mending. My mother died 2 years ago, and my father passed when I was young. I can read and write and do sums. I'm a hard worker, Mrs. Hoffman. Truly I am. I know I do not look like much right now, but if someone would give me a chance, I could prove my worth. I believe you, dear. But you need to regain your strength first. I can offer you a room and meals in exchange for help around the boarding house. I am not as young as I used to be, and my arthritis makes the laundry and heavy cleaning difficult. Would that suit you? Tessa's eyes filled with grateful tears. Yes, madam. Thank you. You cannot know what this means to me. Rest today and tomorrow. Starting Monday, you can help with the breakfast service and the washing. Now, finish your food, and I will show you to your room. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Tessa collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, and slept for 14 hours straight. Over the next 2 weeks, Tessa slowly began to regain a small measure of strength. Mrs. Hoffman proved to be a generous employer, feeding her 3 solid meals a day and not working her too hard while she recovered. The other boarders were mostly respectable men who worked at the lumber mill or the railroad. They tipped their hats politely to Tessa, but otherwise left her alone. Sioux Falls in the summer of 1872 was a growing town full of ambition and rough edges. The Big Sioux River provided power for mills, and the railroad had recently extended its reach, bringing more settlers and commerce. The streets were a mix of established businesses and new construction, with cowboys, farmers, merchants, and railroad workers all mingling together. It was on a Saturday morning in early July that Tessa first saw Kane Xavier. She had walked to the general store to purchase needles and thread for Mrs. Hoffman, deliberately choosing a time when she knew Harold Jennings would likely be at lunch. As she approached the store, a massive man emerged carrying what appeared to be several months' worth of supplies loaded onto his broad shoulders as if they weighed nothing at all. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the doorway. His hair was dark brown, hanging past his collar and looking slightly wild, as if he had trimmed it himself with a hunting knife. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but could not hide the strong jaw and high cheekbones. His arms, bare beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle, bronzed from the sun and marked with old scars. He wore buckskin pants and heavy boots, and a large knife hung from his belt alongside other tools and supplies. What struck Tessa most were his eyes. They were a startling blue-gray, like a winter sky, and when they landed on her, she felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble. He stepped aside to let her pass, but continued to watch her with those penetrating eyes. "Thank you, sir." Tessa ducked her head and hurried into the store, her heart beating strangely fast. Harold Jennings was behind the counter after all, his expression souring when he saw Tessa. "What do you want?" "Needles and thread, please, the finest you have." She placed her coins on the counter. Harold gathered the items grudgingly. "I see you found work with Adelaide Hoffman. I suppose that is the best you could hope for, given your condition." Tessa bit her tongue, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. She took her purchases and turned to leave, only to find the large mountain man had returned and was standing just inside the door, his eyes fixed on Harold with an expression of cold disapproval. "You got a problem, Xavier?" Harold's voice held a note of nervousness. "I got no use for men who are cruel to women," Kane Xavier said simply, "especially women who never did them any harm. My business with Miss Ramsey is my own affair. Your business with her ended when you shamed her in the street. Best you remember your manners from now on." Kane's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. Harold's face reddened, but he said nothing more. Kane held the door open for Tessa, and she slipped past him with a quiet, "Thank you." To her surprise, Kane fell into step beside her as she walked back toward the boarding house. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his long strides naturally shortened to match her pace. "I apologize if I overstepped, miss. I do not usually involve myself in town business, but I was standing outside and heard him speak rudely to you through the window. It did not sit right with me." You did not overstep at all, Mr. Xavier. I am grateful for your kindness. Tessa glanced up at him, having to tilt her head back considerably to meet his eyes. You know my name, but I do not believe we have been properly introduced. Kane Xavier. I have a cabin up in the hills about 15 miles north of here. I come into town every few months for supplies and to trade furs and meat. You're a trapper, then? Trapper, hunter, sometimes a guide for folks heading further west. I prefer the mountains to people, generally speaking. No offense intended. None taken. I imagine people can be quite exhausting. Tessa surprised herself by smiling. There was something about this rough mountain man that put her at ease, despite his intimidating size. I heard what happened when you arrived. The whole town was talking about it. Kane's expression darkened. Jennings is a fool. Any man who would turn away a woman brave enough to travel across the country for a new start does not deserve her in the first place. Tessa felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. That is kind of you to say, though I understand his disappointment. I'm not much to look at presently. Kane stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. You have been through hard times. Anyone with eyes can see that. But you are still here, still standing, still working. That takes strength, the kind that matters far more than appearances. You give yourself time and proper food, and you will bloom again. Mark my words. No one had spoken to her with such certainty and respect in longer than she could remember. Tessa felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the tears of humiliation she had shed 2 weeks ago. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Your words mean more than you know. They had reached the boarding house. Kane tipped his head to her. I will be in town for a few more days, stocking up and getting my horses shod. Perhaps I will see you again before I head back to the hills. Perhaps you will. Good day, Mr. Xavier. Kane, he corrected gently. Just Kane. Then you must call me Tessa. He smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features, and Tessa felt her heart flutter in a way that was entirely new and unexpected. Over the next 3 days, Tessa found herself watching for Kane whenever she went out on errands for Mrs. Hoffman. She spotted him once at the blacksmith's, his shirt off in the heat as he helped the smithy shoe his horses. The sight of his muscular back, gleaming with sweat, made her mouth go dry. Another time, she saw him at the butcher's, talking with the owner about venison and elk meat. He always nodded respectfully when he caught sight of her, and once he crossed the street specifically to greet her and carry her basket of vegetables back to the boarding house. You are putting on a bit of weight, he observed as they walked. Your face has more color, too. Mrs. Hoffman feeds me very well. I have never eaten so much in my life. Good. You need it? He glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. Do you plan to stay in Sioux Falls permanently? I have nowhere else to go, so yes, I suppose I will stay. Mrs. Hoffman has been very generous with me, and perhaps eventually I can find other work. Why do you ask? Kane was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. I was wondering if you would consider having dinner with me tomorrow evening. There is a decent restaurant near the hotel. Nothing fancy, but the food is good and the proprietor is respectable. Tessa's heart leaped. Are you asking to court me, Kane? I suppose I am, if you are willing. I know I am not the kind of man most women want. I live rough, and I am gone for weeks at a time in the mountains, but I find myself thinking about you, and I would like to know you better before I leave town again. I would be honored to have dinner with you, Tessa said softly. You are wrong about what women want, though. At least, you are wrong about what I want. I think you are exactly the kind of man any sensible woman would be fortunate to know. Kane's expression softened, and he reached out to gently touch her cheek with his calloused fingers. Tomorrow evening, then. I will call for you at 6 o'clock. That night, Tessa confided in Mrs. Hoffman about the dinner invitation. The older woman's eyes twinkled with approval. Kane Xavier is a good man, quiet and keeps to himself, but honest and decent. He has never caused trouble in this town, and he is known for keeping his word. You could do far worse, my dear. It is only dinner, Tessa protested, but she could not keep the smile from her face. For now, perhaps. But I saw the way he looked at you when he brought you home yesterday. That man is smitten, mark my words. Tessa spent the next day in a state of nervous anticipation. She had only one decent dress, a gray cotton that Mrs. Hoffman had helped her alter to fit her slowly improving figure. She washed her hair with rose-scented soap, a luxury she allowed herself from her small earnings, and pinned it up as best she could with her limited supply of pins. When Kane arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, freshly bathed and wearing clean clothes, his hair tied back neatly, Tessa thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. He offered his arm, and she took it, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and candles on each table. Kane pulled out Tessa's chair for her, his manners surprisingly refined for a man who spent most of his time in the wilderness. "I hope you are hungry," he said as they settled in. "The roast chicken here is excellent. They make fresh bread daily." "I am always hungry these days," Tessa admitted with a small laugh. "Mrs. Hoffman says I'm making up for lost time." They ordered, and as they waited for their food, they began to talk. Tessa found Kane surprisingly easy to converse with. He asked her about her life in Pennsylvania, and she told him about growing up in a small factory town, about losing her father to a mining accident when she was 8, about working alongside her mother taking in laundry until consumption took her mother 2 years ago. "I tried to keep on alone, but the factory work was brutal, and the pay was barely enough for rent and a bit of food. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides heading west, it seemed like Providence offering me a way out. I saved every penny for 6 months to afford the journey." "You are braver than you know," Kane said quietly. "Most people would have given up." "What about you?" Tessa asked, eager to shift the focus from herself. "How did you come to live in the mountains?" Kane's expression grew distant. "I was born in Missouri, youngest of 6 children. My father was a farmer, struggled to feed all of us. When I was 16, I left to make my own way, worked on riverboats for a time, then as a guide for wagon trains heading to Oregon and California. About 5 years ago, I found my way up into the Black Hills and fell in love with the mountains. Built myself a cabin near a stream, learned to trap and hunt. It is a good life, a free life." "Do you never get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "especially in winter when the snow is deep and I might not see another soul for months. But I always told myself I would rather be alone than settle for the wrong company." He looked at her intently. "Until recently, I thought I was content with that life as it was. And now?" Tessa's voice was barely a whisper. "Now I find myself imagining what it might be like to have someone waiting for me, someone to share the sunsets and the starry nights, someone to come home to." Their food arrived, saving Tessa from having to respond immediately. She was overwhelmed by the emotions Kane's words stirred in her. This powerful, self-sufficient man was suggesting he could imagine a future that included her, and the thought filled her with equal parts hope and terror. They ate and talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. Kane told her about the wildlife in the mountains, about tracking elk and bear, about the secret meadows where wildflowers grew in profusion. Tessa told him about books she had read, borrowed from the town library, about her dream of someday having a garden of her own. "I have a garden at my cabin," Kane said. "Nothing fancy, but I grow vegetables and herbs. The deer are a constant battle, but I have managed to fence them out mostly." "You seem quite self-sufficient." "I have to be, living where I do. But I will not lie and say it would not be nice to share the work and the rewards with someone." He reached across the table and took her hand, his rough palm engulfing her smaller one. "Tessa, I know it is too soon to speak of serious things. We have only just met. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I would like to court you properly, if you are willing." "I am willing," Tessa said, her heart racing. "But Kane, you will be leaving soon to return to your cabin. How can we court if you are in the mountains and I am here?" "I have been thinking about that. I could stay in town for a few more weeks, find odd jobs to keep myself busy, and give us time to know each other better. Or," he paused, seeming uncertain for the first time, "or you could come with me to see the cabin, see the life I lead. Mrs. Hoffman could come as chaperone if she is willing. I want you to understand what you might be agreeing to before we take this any further." The suggestion was shocking and improper, and exactly what Tessa wanted. "Let me speak to Mrs. Hoffman. If she is willing to accompany us, then yes, I would like to see your home." Kane's face broke into a wide smile that made him look years younger. "I will speak to her as well, assure her of my intentions. We could make the trip in 2 days, spend a few days at the cabin, and be back within a week. That night, Tessa approached Mrs. Hoffman nervously. To her surprise, the older woman agreed immediately. "I have not been out of this town in 5 years. A little adventure would do me good. Besides, I trust Kane Xavier. He's a good man, and I think he could make you very happy, dear." The preparations took 3 days. Kane insisted on purchasing Tessa a proper riding skirt and sturdy boots, along with a warm coat for the cooler mountain evenings. He also bought supplies for the journey, refusing to let Tessa or Mrs. Hoffman contribute a penny. They set out on a bright morning in mid-July, Kane riding a large bay gelding and leading 2 pack horses. Mrs. Hoffman rode a gentle mare, while Tessa rode a sweet-tempered chestnut that Kane had borrowed from the livery stable owner. The journey north took them through rolling prairie land that gradually gave way to rocky hills covered in pine and spruce. Kane pointed out landmarks and wildlife, his love for this wild country evident in every word. They stopped for lunch beside a crystal-clear stream, and Kane produced fresh bread, cheese, and apples from his packs. "How much further to your cabin?" Tessa asked, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "We will reach it by late afternoon if we keep a steady pace. The trail gets rougher from here, but nothing the horses cannot handle." As they climbed higher into the hills, Tessa felt as though she was entering another world entirely. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers. Birds sang from the trees, and once they spotted a small herd of deer watching them curiously from a meadow. "It is beautiful here," Tessa breathed. "I had no idea such places existed." "Wait until you see the view from the cabin," Kane said, his eyes warm with pleasure at her reaction. They arrived at Kane's homestead as the sun was beginning to lower toward the western horizon. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a mountain stream burbling past one side. It was larger than Tessa had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it stood a sturdy barn and several outbuildings. "Kane, this is wonderful," Mrs. Hoffman said approvingly. "You have built yourself quite a home." "I have spent 5 years working on it," Kane admitted, dismounting and helping first Mrs. Hoffman and then Tessa down from their horses. "It started as just a single room, but I have added on as I could. Come inside, I will show you around." The interior was surprisingly comfortable. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a handmade table and chairs, and several comfortable-looking chairs with cushions. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and various supplies. A ladder led to a loft above, and 2 doors led to additional rooms. "I sleep in the loft," Kane explained. "The 2 rooms are for storage and such, but I can clear one out for you ladies to use. I will sleep in the barn." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hoffman said briskly. "Tessa and I can share one room perfectly well. You stay in your own loft." While Kane tended to the horses, Tessa and Mrs. Hoffman explored the cabin more thoroughly. Everything was neat and well maintained, from the pots hanging beside the fireplace to the quilts folded on the chairs. "This man built all of this himself," Mrs. Hoffman observed quietly. "He is hard-working and capable. These are good qualities in a husband, Tessa." "We are only courting," Tessa protested weakly. "My dear girl, that man looks at you as though you hung the moon, and unless I am much mistaken, you feel the same way about him." Tessa could not deny it. In the short time she had known Kane, he had shown her more genuine kindness and respect than she had received from anyone in years. More than that, she felt drawn to him in a way she could not fully explain. When he was near, she felt safe and valued. When he smiled at her, her heart raced. When he touched her hand or helped her from her horse, she felt a warmth spread through her entire body. That evening, Kane prepared dinner for them. Venison steaks, fried potatoes, and fresh greens from his garden. He moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, and the meal was delicious. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Tessa asked, savoring every bite. "Necessity. When you live alone, you either learn to cook or eat poorly. I prefer eating well." Kane grinned at her across the table. "Though I admit it is far more pleasant cooking for appreciative company." After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night sounds of the forest surrounded them, the hoot of an owl, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. "I could live here forever," Tessa said softly, not meaning for Kane to hear. But he did hear. and his hand found hers in the darkness. I hope you mean that, because I am finding it harder and harder to imagine this place without you in it. Over the next 3 days, Tessa fell completely in love, not just with Kane, though her feelings for him grew stronger with each passing hour, but with the life he had built. She helped him tend his garden, learning which plants needed more water and which were being targeted by hungry rabbits. She watched him chop wood, mesmerized by the play of muscles across his back and shoulders. She walked with him through the forest as he checked his trap lines, listening as he explained the habits of different animals and pointed out useful plants. Kane taught her to fish in the stream, standing behind her to guide her hands as she learned to cast the line. The feel of his solid chest against her back, his arms around her, made her dizzy with a longing she had never experienced before. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing. Kane told her about his dreams of expanding the cabin, perhaps adding a second story and a larger porch. Tessa told him about the children she had always hoped to have someday, the family she had longed for. "I want children," Kane said seriously. "At least 3 or 4, if I am blessed. I want them to grow up out here, wild and free, knowing how to live off the land but also educated and cultured. I have books, and we could teach them to read and write and do sums." "We?" Tessa's voice was tremulous. Kane turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Tessa, I know it has only been a short time. Most people would say we are crazy to even think of such things, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife, to share this life with me, to build a future together. Kane, I want that too, more than anything. But are you certain? You said yourself that you came to town looking for supplies, not a wife. Maybe Providence had other plans for me. Maybe I was meant to be there the day you stepped off that stagecoach. Maybe every hard thing you went through and every lonely year I spent in these mountains was leading us both to this moment." He cupped her face gently in his large hands. "I love you, Tessa Ramsey. I love your courage and your kindness and your quiet strength. I love the way you laugh and the way you are not afraid of hard work. I love everything about you. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you are valued and cherished." Tears streamed down Tessa's face as she threw her arms around his neck. "I love you too, Kane Xavier. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stood up to Harold Jennings on my behalf. You made me feel worthy and valuable when I thought I was nothing but a bag of bones that no one could want." Kane kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that spoke of promises and devotion. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Kane rested his forehead against hers. "You were never just a bag of bones. You were a diamond covered in dust, and I saw you shining through. I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how precious you are to me." Mrs. Hoffman, who had been tactfully reading in one of the bedrooms, emerged with suspiciously bright eyes. "I assume congratulations are in order?" "We are engaged," Tessa said, laughing through her tears. "If you will give us your blessing, Mrs. Hoffman." "My dear child, you have my blessing and my heartfelt happiness. Kane, you are getting a treasure. Treat her accordingly." "I intend to, madam, for the rest of my life." They returned to Sioux Falls 3 days later, Tessa wearing a simple gold band that had belonged to Kane's mother, which he had kept all these years in a small wooden box. The engagement period was brief by most standards, only 6 weeks, but both Kane and Tessa saw no reason to wait longer than necessary. During those 6 weeks, Kane worked odd jobs around Sioux Falls, helping to build a new barn for a farmer outside town, working at the sawmill, doing whatever he could to earn money. He spent every spare moment with Tessa, courting her properly with walks along the river, picnics in the countryside, and long conversations on Mrs. Hoffman's porch. Tessa continued her work at the boarding house, but she also spent time preparing for her new life. Mrs. Hoffman helped her sew 2 new dresses, both sturdy and practical for mountain living. She learned to bake bread and preserve vegetables, skills she would need in her new home. She practiced shooting a rifle, Kane teaching her patiently until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "You need to know how to protect yourself when I am out checking traps or hunting," Kane explained. "Not that I think you will ever need it, but I will rest easier knowing you can handle a gun if necessary." The transformation in Tessa over those weeks was remarkable. With regular, abundant meals and the glow of happiness, she filled out into a healthy, beautiful young woman. Her auburn hair regained its luster and shine, her green eyes sparkled with life, and her cheeks bloomed with color. She was still slender, but now she looked strong and vibrant rather than gaunt and sickly. "Look at you," Mrs. Hoffman said one evening as Tessa tried on her wedding dress, a simple but lovely gown of cream-colored cotton with lace trim. "You are absolutely radiant, my dear. Kane was right about you blooming." The wedding took place on a warm Saturday in late August at the small church in Sioux Falls. The guest list was modest: Mrs. Hoffman, the boarding house residents, the minister and his wife, and a few townspeople who had befriended Tessa during her time there. Notably absent was Harold Jennings, though several people mentioned he had been heard complaining about how the scrawny mail-order bride he had rejected had somehow snared the eligible Kane Xavier. "Let him complain," Kane said when Tessa mentioned it. "His loss is my gain, and I will be thanking Providence for his foolishness for the rest of my days." Tessa walked down the aisle on Mrs. Hoffman's arm, her heart so full of joy she thought it might burst. Kane stood at the altar in his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and tied back, his eyes locked on her with such love and devotion that she felt tears threatening. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Kane slipped a second gold band onto Tessa's finger beside his mother's ring, his hands trembled slightly. When they were pronounced husband and wife and he kissed her, the small congregation applauded warmly. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Hoffman providing a magnificent spread of food and the townspeople contributing various dishes and desserts. There was music and dancing, and Kane proved to be a surprisingly good dancer despite his size. "Where did you learn to dance?" Tessa asked, laughing as he spun her around the parlor. "My mother insisted all her children learn proper manners, including dancing. She said you never knew when such skills might come in handy." He pulled her close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I am grateful for her wisdom now, as it gives me an excuse to hold my beautiful wife in my arms in front of all these people." As the sun began to set, Kane and Tessa said their goodbyes and prepared to leave for the cabin. They would spend their first night at a small cabin Kane had rented just outside town, then head to the mountains the next morning. Mrs. Hoffman hugged Tessa tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Be happy, my dear girl. You deserve all the joy in the world." "I will never forget your kindness to me," Tessa said, her own eyes wet. "You saved my life when I had nowhere else to turn. And you brought light into my house and into this town. Now go with your husband and build a beautiful life together." The little cabin Kane had rented was cozy and private, with a comfortable bed and a bottle of wine waiting for them. Kane carried Tessa over the threshold, making her laugh, then set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," Tessa admitted, "but mostly I'm happy. So very happy." "We will take things slowly," Kane promised. "I want this to be perfect for you." And it was perfect. Kane was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure Tessa was comfortable and cared for. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with tenderness and love, a joining that felt sacred and right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Kane's large hand stroking Tessa's hair as she rested her head on his broad chest. "I love you, Mrs. Xavier," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Xavier. Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible. Thank you for feeding me when I was starving, not just for food, but for kindness and respect. Thank you for making me glow." "You are always glowing, my darling. I just made sure you had enough fuel to let your light shine." He kissed the top of her head. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that light never dims." They left for the mountain cabin the next morning, beginning their new life together. The journey felt different this time, full of promise and excitement. When they arrived at the cabin, Kane swept Tessa into his arms and carried her inside, both of them laughing. The first weeks of marriage were a period of adjustment and discovery. Tessa learned the rhythms of mountain life, rising early to tend the garden, preserving food for the coming winter, helping Kane with his trap lines. Kane, for his part, discovered the profound joy of sharing his life with someone who appreciated the beauty and freedom of the wilderness as much as he did. They worked side by side, building additional storage for their supplies, improving the garden fence, gathering firewood for winter. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, reading aloud to each other from Kane's collection of books or simply talking about their dreams for the future. "I was thinking we should add another room to the cabin," Kane said one night in September as the first chill of autumn crept into the air. "A nursery for when the babies come." "Babies?" Tessa looked up from her mending, a smile playing at her lips. "You are very confident, Mr. Xavier." "Hopeful, Mrs. Xavier. Very hopeful." He pulled her into his lap, nuzzling her neck. "Though I admit I am enjoying the process of trying to make those babies." Tessa swatted him playfully, but she leaned into his embrace. "I think a nursery is a wonderful idea, though we may want to wait until spring to start building, when the weather's better." "True. That gives us all winter to plan it out and gather materials." As it turned out, the nursery became a priority sooner than they expected. In late October, Tessa realized she had missed her monthly courses. By early November, she was certain she was pregnant, experiencing the telltale signs of morning sickness and tender breasts. Kane's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then immediately set her down gently, worried he might have hurt her. "I am not made of glass," Tessa laughed. "The baby is well protected in there." "A baby," Kane breathed, placing his large hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Tessa, you have made me the happiest man alive." Winter came early that year, with the first serious snow falling in mid-November. Kane worked tirelessly to make sure they had everything they needed. Firewood stacked high, meat smoked and stored, vegetables preserved in the root cellar. He was fiercely protective of Tessa now that she was carrying his child, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Tessa protested when he tried to stop her from carrying water from the stream. "I know, but indulge me. I want to take care of you and our baby." The winter was long and cold, but it was also magical. Snowed in together for weeks at a time, Kane and Tessa grew even closer. They played cards and chess, read books aloud, and talked for hours about everything under the sun. Kane rubbed Tessa's feet when they swelled, held her hair back when morning sickness struck, and talked to her growing belly every night. "I cannot wait to meet you, little one," he would murmur, his ear pressed to Tessa's stomach. "Your mom and I are going to love you so much." In late December, a break in the weather allowed Kane to make the trek to Sioux Falls for supplies and to check on Mrs. Hoffman. He returned 3 days later with news that made Tessa clap her hands in delight. "Mrs. Hoffman is going to come stay with us when your time draws near. She has experience with birthing babies, having helped deliver half the children in Sioux Falls over the years. She will come in May and stay until the baby is born and you are both healthy and strong." "Oh, Kane, that is wonderful news. I have been a little frightened about giving birth so far from town." "You will never have to be frightened, not while I am alive to protect you. But I admit I will rest easier having Adelaide here to help." As winter gave way to spring, Tessa's belly grew round and full. She had never felt healthier or more content. The sickness passed and she bloomed with the pregnancy, her skin glowing and her hair thick and lustrous. Kane could hardly keep his hands off her, constantly touching her belly to feel the baby kick, kissing her neck and shoulders, telling her how beautiful she was. "I was right about you glowing," he said one evening in April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You absolutely radiate light, my love." "That is because I am happy. Truly, deeply happy. I never knew life could be this good, Kane. A year ago, I was starving and desperate, thinking I was worthless. Now look at me. Healthy, loved, about to become a mother. It feels like a dream. It is real, and you deserve every bit of it. You are the strongest, bravest woman I know, and I fall more in love with you every single day." Mrs. Hoffman arrived in mid-May, brought by Kane, who had traveled to Sioux Falls to fetch her. She pronounced Tessa to be in excellent health and predicted the baby would arrive in late June or early July. "Everything looks perfect, dear. You have obviously been well cared for." "Mrs." Hoffman gave Kane an approving look. "And you, young man, look like you are about to jump out of your skin with worry." "I just want everything to go smoothly," Kane admitted. "I have faced down grizzly bears without flinching, but the thought of Tessa in pain terrifies me. Birth is natural and normal. Tessa is healthy and strong. All will be well, you will see. The baby arrived on a warm evening in late June, as the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and pink. Tessa's labor was not easy, lasting nearly 12 hours, but Mrs. Hoffman coached her through it with calm expertise, while Kane held her hand and whispered encouragement. "You can do this, my love. You are so strong. I am right here with you." When the baby finally slipped into the world with a lusty cry, Kane was the first to hold him, tears streaming down his rugged face as he looked at his son in wonder. "He is perfect," Kane breathed. "Tessa, look at what we made. He is absolutely perfect." Tessa, exhausted but radiant with joy, held out her arms for the baby. Mrs. Hoffman placed the small, wriggling bundle on her chest, and Tessa felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting so long to meet you." They named him Jacob Kane Xavier, and he was indeed perfect, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Kane was a devoted father from the very first moment, changing diapers and walking the floor with Jacob when he fussed, singing to him in his deep, rumbling voice. Mrs. Hoffman stayed for 3 weeks, making sure both Tessa and the baby were thriving before returning to Sioux Falls. Before she left, she pulled Tessa into a tight embrace. "I am so proud of you, my dear girl. Look at the life you have built, the family you have created. You are proof that with courage and hope, even the darkest circumstances can lead to the brightest futures." "I could not have done it without you, Mrs. Hoffman. You gave me a chance when no one else would. And you took that chance and ran with it. Never forget how strong you are, Tessa Xavier." The years that followed were filled with hard work and deep joy. Jacob grew into a sturdy, happy toddler, exploring the forest under his father's watchful eye. 2 years after Jacob's birth, Tessa gave birth to a daughter they named Emily Rose, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue-gray eyes. 18 months after Emily came another son, Thomas, who was the spitting image of Kane. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. Kane added a second story with 2 large bedrooms for the children, and he built a bigger porch where the family could sit together in the evenings. Tessa's garden flourished, providing vegetables and herbs, and she learned to make her own cheese and butter. Life was not always easy. Winters could be harsh, and there were occasional scares with wild animals or illness. But through it all, Kane and Tessa faced every challenge together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kane surprised Tessa by taking her on a picnic to a hidden meadow he had discovered. The children were left in the capable hands of a neighboring family who lived about 10 miles away, homesteaders who had become good friends. The meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, and a small waterfall fed a crystal-clear pool. Kane spread a blanket and unpacked a basket filled with Tessa's favorite foods. "Do you remember our first dinner together?" he asked as they ate. "How could I forget? I was so nervous I could barely swallow my food, and you were so handsome I could hardly think straight." Kane laughed. "I was terrified. I had never courted a woman before, and I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I had to see you again, had to know if you felt even a fraction of what I was feeling. I felt it all, from the very beginning. You made me feel valued and beautiful when I thought I was nothing. You fed me, not just food for my body, but kindness and respect for my soul. You made me glow, Kane. You were always meant to glow, my darling. I just made sure you had what you needed to shine." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. 5 years married, and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. How is that possible? Because love grows when it is tended properly, like my garden. We have tended our love carefully, watering it with kindness and patience, feeding it with respect and devotion. Of course it has flourished. They made love there in the meadow, under the open sky, with the sound of the waterfall providing a natural symphony. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the grass, Tessa's head on Kane's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I want more children," Kane said suddenly. "At least 2 more, if we are blessed." "You want 5 children?" Tessa laughed. "Are you trying to populate the entire mountain range?" "Maybe. Or maybe I just love being a father to our babies, and I love watching you be a mother. You are magnificent at it, Tessa. Our children are happy and healthy and loved, and that is all because of you." "Because of us," Tessa corrected. You are the most devoted father I have ever seen. You should see how other men in town interact with their children when we visit Sioux Falls. Most barely acknowledge them, leaving all the care to their wives. But you are there for every moment, teaching and playing and loving them. They are my children. Why would I not want to spend every possible moment with them? This was exactly why Tessa loved him so much. Kane saw fatherhood not as a burden, but as a privilege, and he approached it with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. They did have 2 more children over the next 4 years, twin girls they named Sarah Jane and Catherine Marie. The cabin was full of noise and laughter, the sound of children playing and learning, of family meals around the big table Kane had built, of bedtime stories and lullabies. Tessa's transformation from the skeletal, desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Sioux Falls was complete. She was healthy and strong, her body curved and lush from bearing 5 children, her face glowing with contentment. She managed her household with efficiency and grace, teaching her children to read and write and do sums, tending her ever-expanding garden, preserving food for winter, and supporting Kane in his work. Kane, for his part, had never been happier. His business had expanded over the years. He still trapped and hunted, but he had also begun guiding hunting parties and selling his furs for good prices in Sioux Falls and even in larger towns further east. He had built a reputation for honesty and skill, and people sought him out specifically. But his greatest pride and joy was his family. He loved coming home from a hunting trip to find his children running to greet him, squealing, "Papa!" as they jumped into his arms. He loved sitting by the fire with Tessa at the end of a long day, her hand in his, discussing the children's progress and their plans for the future. He loved the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day. On a crisp autumn evening when they had been married for 10 years, Kane and Tessa stood on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were asleep inside, tired out from a day of helping with the harvest. The trees were ablaze with color, gold and red and orange against the deep green of the pines. "Do you ever regret it?" Kane asked suddenly. "Giving up town life, living out here so far from civilization?" Tessa looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Kane, this is the life I always dreamed of, even when I did not know such a life was possible. I have you, our children, this beautiful place. What could I possibly regret? I just want to make sure you are happy, that you do not feel isolated or lonely. I am happier than I ever imagined possible. Yes, we are far from town, but we have friends among the other homesteaders. We visit Sioux Falls several times a year. I have everything I need right here." She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "You and our children are my whole world, Kane Xavier. This life we have built is more than I ever dared hope for." Kane pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I feel the same way. When I think about where we both were 10 years ago, how close we came to never meeting at all, it takes my breath away. If Jennings had not rejected you, if I had come to town a week earlier or a week later, we might never have found each other. But we did find each other. Despite everything that could have gone wrong, we found each other. That is not coincidence, Kane. That is destiny. Then I am grateful to destiny for bringing me the greatest gift of my life." They stood there together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. The children grew and thrived. Jacob showed his father's love of the wilderness, spending hours exploring the forest and learning to track and hunt. Emily was quieter, loving books and drawing, sketching pictures of flowers and animals with surprising skill. Thomas was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. The twins, Sarah and Catherine, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and playing elaborate games only they understood. Kane taught all his children to shoot and track, to identify useful plants and dangerous ones, to respect the wilderness and the creatures in it. Tessa taught them to read and write, to do mathematics, to know history and literature. Together, they raised their children to be capable, educated, and kind. When Jacob turned 16, he began accompanying his father on longer hunting trips, learning the business he would someday inherit. Emily, at 14, had developed a talent for healing, learning from books and from an elderly woman in Sioux Falls who knew herbal medicine. Thomas, at 12, was already talking about becoming a scout for the Army when he was old enough. The twins, at 8, were still trying to decide what they wanted to be when they grew up, changing their minds daily. "You have done well with them," Tessa told Kane one evening as they watched their children play a game in the yard. "They are good people, all of them." "We have done well with them," Kane corrected, "and they are not finished growing yet. We have many more years of shaping and guiding ahead of us." "I know, and I look forward to every one of those years. Do you realize we have been married for 15 years? 15 years since I stepped off that stagecoach, thinking my life was over. And instead, it was just beginning. The best years of both our lives started that day, even if we did not know it yet." Tessa leaned her head on Kane's shoulder, watching the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of crimson and gold. "Do you remember what you said to me after Harold Jennings rejected me? You said I would bloom again if I gave myself time and proper food." "I remember, and I was right, was I not?" "You were more than right. I did not just bloom. Kane, I flourished. And it was all because of you, because you saw something in me worth nurturing. You fed me when I was starving. You gave me shelter when I was homeless. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You made me glow." Kane turned to face her fully, his weathered hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "No, my darling. I gave you the means to let your own light shine. The glow was always inside you. You just needed someone to believe in you enough to help you see it yourself. And now, look at you. Strong, beautiful, the heart of our family and the love of my life. You are magnificent, Tessa Xavier. You always have been." Tears sparkled in Tessa's eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of joy and gratitude for the life she had been given. "I love you, Kane Xavier. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Tessa Xavier. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky. Two people who had found each other when both were lost, who had built a life and a family against all odds, who had proven that love, when nurtured and protected, could overcome any obstacle. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. There were weddings as the children grew up and found their own loves. Jacob married a sweet-tempered girl from Sioux Falls and built a cabin not far from his parents, going into business with his father. Emily married a young doctor and moved to town where she used her healing skills to help others. Thomas did indeed become a scout, though he returned home regularly to visit. The twins married brothers from a neighboring homestead and settled down to raise their own families nearby. Kane and Tessa became grandparents, delighting in the babies that began arriving regularly. Their cabin, now expanded even further, was frequently full of children and grandchildren, the sound of multiple generations sharing meals and stories and laughter. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a surprise celebration. The entire family gathered at the cabin, children, their spouses, grandchildren running everywhere. There was music and dancing, a feast of epic proportions, and speeches honoring the couple who had built such a strong foundation for their family. Jacob stood to make a toast. His own children gathered around him. "To my parents, who taught us what real love looks like. You showed us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day. You chose to love each other through hard times and good times, through challenges and triumphs. You built not just this cabin and this homestead, but a legacy of love that will carry on through all of us and our children and our children's children. We love you both more than words can say." Kane and Tessa, both with tears streaming down their faces, stood and embraced as their family applauded. Looking around at all the faces of the people they loved most in the world, Tessa felt her heart might burst with joy. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and they were alone again in their quiet cabin, Kane and Tessa sat together on the porch swing he had built years ago. The stars were brilliant overhead, the mountains dark silhouettes against the sky. "It has been a good life, has it not?" Kane said softly, his arm around Tessa's shoulders. "The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember what people said when you first arrived in Sioux Falls? They called you a bag of bones, said no man would want you. I remember. It hurt terribly at the time, but now I can look back and be grateful. If Harold Jennings had accepted me, I would have been trapped in a loveless marriage with a cruel man. Instead, his rejection led me to you. Those people who called me names were wrong about so many things, but most of all, they were wrong about my worth. You saw my worth, Kane. You saw past the hunger and the weariness to the person I could become with love and care. I saw the person you already were, Tessa. Beautiful, brave, strong. I just made sure you had what you needed to show the world what I could already see. He kissed the top of her head. I fed you until you glowed, and you lit up my entire world in return. We lit up each other's worlds. That is what love does, Kane. Real love. The kind we have. It makes both people better, stronger, brighter. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently in the swing, listening to the night sounds of the forest they had called home for 3 decades. If you could go back and tell that frightened, half-starved young woman stepping off the stagecoach what her future held, what would you say? Kane asked. Tessa thought for a moment. I would tell her to have courage, that the worst is behind her and the best is yet to come. I would tell her that she is stronger than she knows, that she deserves love and happiness, and that in just a few short days she is going to meet the man who will make all her dreams come true. I would tell her that she is going to be so happy, happier than she ever imagined possible. She turned to look up at Kane, her eyes soft with love. What would you tell that lonely mountain man who came to town just looking for supplies? Kane smiled. I would tell him to prepare himself, because his entire life is about to change. I would tell him that he is about to meet a woman who will challenge him, inspire him, and love him with a fierceness that will take his breath away. I would tell him that he is not going to leave town alone, that he is going to find his heart and his home and his future all wrapped up in one remarkable woman. And I would tell him to treasure every single moment, because the years are going to pass faster than he can imagine. They have passed quickly, have they not? In the blink of an eye, but I would not change a single moment. Well, perhaps I would have liked to punch Harold Jennings in the nose just once. Tessa laughed. He did us a favor, really. I heard he married a widow from Yankton a few years after I arrived. They moved to Minnesota. I hope they are happy, though I suspect he is probably still as unpleasant as ever. His loss, my gain. I will never stop being grateful that he was fool enough to reject you. As the night deepened and the air grew cooler, they went inside to their bedroom, the room they had shared for 30 years. The bed was the same one Kane had built when he first constructed the cabin, though he had replaced the mattress and frame several times over the years. The quilt on the bed had been made by Tessa, a beautiful pattern of stars that had taken her 2 years to complete. They prepared for bed with the easy intimacy of long marriage, helping each other with buttons and laces, sharing the wash basin, brushing out Tessa's hair, which was now threaded with silver, but still thick and long. When they finally lay down together, Kane pulled Tessa close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. This had been their favorite sleeping position for 3 decades, and it still felt as natural and right as breathing. Thank you, Tessa whispered into the darkness. For what, my love? For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible, for feeding me when I was starving, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for giving me a home and a family and a life beyond my wildest dreams, for making me glow. Kane tightened his arm around her, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about courting a lady. Thank you for loving me and building this life with me. Thank you for our children and grandchildren. Thank you for being my partner in every way that matters. Thank you for glowing so brightly that you light up even the darkest nights. I love you, Tessa Xavier. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you for all eternity. And I love you, Kane Xavier, now and always. They fell asleep as they had every night for 30 years, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Kane and Tessa grew older gracefully, their bodies marked by time, but their love as strong as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. The cabin that Kane had built so many years ago became the heart of a growing family compound, with several other homes dotting the mountainside as their children and grandchildren built their own lives nearby. On a golden afternoon in late September, when they had been married for 40 years, Kane and Tessa took one of their favorite walks to a ridge overlooking a valley painted with autumn colors. Kane was 70 years old now, his hair and beard completely white, but he was still strong and vital. Tessa was 62, her auburn hair silvered, but her green eyes still bright and clear. They sat on a fallen log, holding hands and watching an eagle soar overhead. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Kane asked. "It was during our courtship before we married. You said the view was so beautiful it made your heart ache." "I remember. It still makes my heart ache, but in the best way possible. This place, this life, you, our family, all of it is almost too beautiful to bear sometimes." Kane kissed her hand gently. "We have been blessed beyond measure, you and I. Not many people get to live the kind of love story we have lived." "No, they do not. We are very lucky. Or perhaps it was not luck at all. Perhaps we created our own happiness through hard work and devotion and choosing each other every single day. That is exactly what we did. And I would choose you again, Tessa, in every lifetime, in every version of reality. You are my everything. And you are mine, my dearest love, my mountain man who fed me until I glowed, who saw beauty in what others called a bag of bones, who loved me into fullness and life. You are the answer to prayers I did not even know I was praying." They sat together until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold and purple. Then they walked hand in hand back to the cabin, where their children and grandchildren were gathering for Sunday dinner, a tradition they had maintained for decades. The house was full of noise and life and love. Children ran through the rooms, the smell of cooking food filled the air, multiple conversations overlapped and intertwined. Kane and Tessa stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. "This," Tessa said softly, gesturing to the scene before them. "This is what it was all for. Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of doubt or fear. It all led to this, a family bound together by love, carrying on the legacy we built together." Kane pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You built this, Tessa. You are the heart of this family, the foundation on which everything else rests." "We built it together," she corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we created together. That is the beauty of true partnership, Kane. Neither of us could have done this alone, but together we moved mountains." One of their great-grandchildren, a little girl with Tessa's auburn hair and Kane's blue-gray eyes, ran up to them and grabbed their hands. "Great-grandma, great-grandpa, come sit down. Dinner is ready, and Mama said we cannot start without you." They let themselves be pulled to the head of the long table Kane had built years ago to accommodate their growing family. As they sat down, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, Kane raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, and the room quieted immediately. "To my wife, my best friend, my partner in all things. 40 years ago, I had the extraordinary good fortune to meet a brave, beautiful woman who changed my life in every possible way. She took a lonely mountain man and taught him what it meant to truly live, to love, to build something lasting. Tessa, you are the reason my heart beats, the reason I wake up grateful every morning. You are my miracle, and I love you more today than I did on our wedding day. To Tessa." "To Tessa," the entire family echoed, raising their glasses. Tessa's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling as she stood. "And to Kane, the man who saw me when I was invisible, who valued me when I felt worthless, who loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You fed my body when it was starving, and you fed my soul with kindness and respect and devotion. You made me glow, my darling, and that glow has spread to every person in this room. Our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren shine because of the love we built together. To Kane." "To Kane!" everyone shouted. Then the great-grandchildren insisted on a toast to both of them, and soon everyone was talking and laughing again, passing dishes and sharing stories. Kane and Tessa ate and smiled and soaked in every moment, knowing these were the golden years, the harvest of everything they had planted so long ago. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed in the various rooms of the expanded cabin, Kane and Tessa stood on their porch one more time, looking up at the stars. "Do you think people in Sioux Falls still talk about us?" Tessa asked with a slight smile. "The mail-order bride who was called a bag of bones, and the mountain man who married her anyway? If they do, I hope they talk about how that bag of bones became the most beautiful, vibrant woman in the territory. I hope they talk about how we built a life and a family that has touched dozens of lives across 2 generations. I hope they talk about how real love, the kind that sees past surface appearances to the soul beneath, can create miracles. We did create a miracle, did we not? Or perhaps we were each other's miracle all along. Kane wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. You were definitely my miracle, the best thing that ever happened to me. And you were mine. My protector, my provider, my partner, my great love. You fed me until I glowed, Kane Xavier. And I will spend whatever time I have left on this earth being grateful for you. They stood there in the starlight, 2 people who had found each other when both needed saving, who had built a love story that would be told to their great-great-grandchildren someday. They had overcome poverty and prejudice, hunger and hardship, doubt and despair. They had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would ripple out through generations. From a bag of bones to a woman who glowed with health and happiness. From a lonely mountain man to the patriarch of a thriving family. Their transformation had been mutual, each helping the other become the best version of themselves, each lighting the way for the other through dark times and bright. As they finally went inside for the night, climbing the stairs to their bedroom with careful steps, holding hands like young lovers, they knew that their story had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of fear or uncertainty. They had bet on love, and love had rewarded them beyond measure. In the bedroom, they helped each other undress with the tenderness of long practice. Kane brushed out Tessa's silver hair while she sat at her vanity, just as he had done thousands of times before. Tessa helped Kane with his boots, which his aging joints sometimes made difficult, just as she had done countless times over the years. When they finally lay down together, Tessa in Kane's arms as always, she sighed contentedly. I am tired tonight, but it is a good tired. The tired of a life well lived, of a day full of family and love. Rest now, my darling. I will be right here when you wake. You always are. You always have been from the moment we met. My constant, my anchor, my home. As you are mine. Sleep now, Tessa. Dream sweet dreams. I do not need to dream any more, Kane. I am living my sweetest dream every day I wake up beside you. They fell asleep as they had for 40 years, wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts beating in rhythm, their souls intertwined. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and majestic, silent witnesses to a love story that had transformed 2 broken people into something whole and beautiful. The woman they had once called a bag of bones had not just survived, she had thrived. She had glowed with health and happiness, with love and purpose. And the mountain man who had fed her, who had seen her worth when others saw only weakness, had been equally transformed by her love. Together, they had built more than a cabin or a family. They had built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of seeing someone's true worth, of choosing compassion over cruelty, of feeding both body and soul until they glow. And as they slept, surrounded by the mountains they loved, in the home they had built together with their family sleeping safely nearby, they were living proof that even the most broken beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Their love story was complete, not because it was ending, but because it had come full circle. From desperation to devotion, from hunger to abundance, from darkness to light. They had found each other against all odds, and they had made each other glow. And they would continue to glow together for all the days they had left, each day a gift, each moment a treasure, each breath a prayer of gratitude for the extraordinary gift of finding true love in the wild, beautiful wilderness of the Dakota Territory.